Welcome to In Her Voice, a podcast created for women who listen to and live by their deepest wisdom, their inner voice.
Such a huge takeaway
for you,
and I hope
the
that
woman who feels pulled
this
to
interview
more,
has
to
reminded
lead,
you
to create,
to
what makes you
dream
special, and to be a world changer.
because you are amazing.
My name is Kelly Covert,
I
and
also
I
want
am
to
an inner
remind
voice
you
coach.
Join me
That
here
it's
each
okay
week
as we explore what
if
it means
you
to reach for
need
your
help
inspired
right now.
potential.
It's
all
okay
while
if you
honoring your
struggle
worthiness each
to know
and every
which
day.
direction you need to go in
Hello,
next.
hello.
Or
This
if
is
you
Kelly.
struggle
Thank
even
you for
with
being here to listen to
the
In Her Voice
simple
today.
idea of
I have
understanding
a
what it
really
is
great
that you want
interview
most.
today with India Jackson.
That is where
She
the
is here to
practice
talk
of
about
listening to your inner
how
voice comes
to
in. And this is
flaunt
not a
your
practice
inner
that
fire.
we are
And talk about
taught
fire.
growing up.
It is
This is not
such
something
a great
that
interview. One of the
comes
things that I really love
easily
that we
and
talk about is
effortlessly.
this idea
And
belonging
it's nice
to
to
yourself.
have some hand holding.
Do you
And
belong
that's
to
what
yourself?
I do.
Do you
I will
own
hold your
yourself?
hand with you.
Do you
and
accept
teach you how to listen
yourself?
to your
Because
inner voice
these are
and
the
teach you
keys
how to listen to what your soul is
really
asking for.
becoming
And the
who
beauty
you were
of that
born
is
to be.
you can get
And
really
also
clear
it's
on
the
what you
key
want
to standing
so you
out.
can stop
So let
wasting
me tell you a
time
little bit
and
about
energy
India.
on the things that
India
don't
Jackson
matter.
is the CEO of Flaunt Your Fire.
Have you ever
a
done
visual
that?
marketing agency known for taking
Yeah,
an
me too.
unapologetically
And
authentic strategy
there's
to
no
branding and
need
visibility
to do
gets
that
real
when you listen to your
ROI.
inner voice.
From
So
Christian
if you're
Dior
feeling
to
a
coaches
pull,
and their
if you feel like
staff
you could
over the
use a
last
little bit of
11
hand
years, her
holding,
team has
a
provided
little bit of extra
consulting,
support
strategy,
in
photography,
creating the practice
training,
of
and
listening to
more
your
for
inner
their
voice, I
clients.
encourage you to sign
She
up
has an
for a
art
deep
and design
dive
degree, yet credits her
session.
unique perspective to
This
her
is a
years
60
of
to 90 minute
experience
session where
transitioning from model
you
to published
really
photographer,
take the time
and
to
her past
listen.
time as an
And I
award-winning
am your
plant-based
guide in that.
bodybuilder.
So I would
India loves
love to
disrupting
support
the way
you
people view
in
career
listening
labels,
and
branding,
finding those things that
visibility,
really
and
matter to you.
ultimately
And
themselves.
just really
She is also
honing
the
in
co-host of
on the most
podcast
important
Pause
things
on the
and
Play,
stop wasting time and energy
which
on the rest.
you have
So if
heard
this is
mention of
calling
here
to you,
before
you can
in my
sign up for
interview with
your
Erica
deep dive
Corday.
session at
So let's get right
kellycovert.com.
to the interview
And
with
I
India
look forward to
Jackson.
talking with you. As always, a reminder.
Well, hello,
for
India
you
Jackson.
today.
Welcome to In Her Voice. How are you today?
You are so
I am
amazing.
well. Thank you for having me
You are
today.
so
Thank
wonderful.
you so much. And
you have
you know,
so many
it's
things
funny
to offer.
circumstances that
You
you are
are
here
so special
again.
and so unique
Although
and so
my audience has
talented.
never heard from you before
Please,
because we
please,
recorded
please own
an
it.
interview
Know
over a
that
year
what
ago
makes you unique
that just
is
didn't make its way
needed
into the universe
and
before
wanted
COVID
and
hit.
desired in this world.
And so, I
You
reached out to
are
you and
worthy.
I thought, it's been so long. Maybe there's something that feels more in the moment that you would like to talk about. And you said, yeah, let's talk about how to flaunt your inner fire. And I was like, that sounds amazing. So that's where I want to start. What do you mean when you talk about flaunting your fire?
Ew. Flaunting your fire to me means going deep inside and looking at the things that makes you different, that may feel embarrassing, shameful, might not even feel that interesting to you. And recognizing that these are the very things that will resonate with others and will actually kind of touch their heart in a way that other people won't be able to in the same way. These are the things that make you, that overused word, unique. And so finding that place where you can love on those things and accept those things about yourself, and then even go so far as to be courageous enough to flaunt them, is really going to be what allows you to step into your truth and resonate with others.
Okay, so let's dig in here because I believe this and I think it takes great courage to do it because, you know, I think back to when I was in 7th grade and all I wanted more than anything was to feel like I fit in. And I did anything and everything to try to fit in. I changed the way I talked. I changed the way I dressed. I, tried to hang out with the right people. I tried, and of course, this is the 7th grade me, and I do feel like I have grown since then. But I feel like everything that we are taught is about how to fit in and how to belong. So, how do we sort of like hold those two? How do you filter out that need to belong and need to fit in?
Ooh, I can say that it's something that doesn't happen overnight for sure. It requires practice, it requires effort, it requires really listening to exactly what you talk about here, your inner voice. And then also realizing to a degree that I don't think that there's ever this normal that we're told that we need to be, or this certain type of profile or stereotype of a human that we're told that we need to conform to in order to fit in. And really digging deeper into some of those stories that we can give ourselves about others, I think has been really beneficial to see that many of those can be false. And many times what we're seeing in the media or even in friendship circles or with people that go to the same schools as us or the same workplaces as us or whatever that may be, sometimes they're also conforming to what they think they need to be to get by.
Mm-hmm. So we're all, in essence, like living behind this mask of what we think we should be or who we think we should be or how we think we should be showing up, and hiding what you say really truly are the most valuable parts of ourselves. Why is it as you say, the things that feel strange, the things that feel different, the things that are maybe embarrassing, why are those the things that resonate with other people?
I find that just from my personal standpoint of my own life experiences, the more that I showed up as myself and the more that I created boundaries around what I chose to share or not, but really asked myself if the things that I was sharing was aligned with my truth versus doing what I thought I needed to do, really became like what I was willing to put out there and show up as, the more it gave other people permission to be more of themselves. And I think that many people are looking for that. They're looking for that permission to say that this thing about me that maybe I even carried some shame or some guilt about is actually just being a normal human, and, really challenging that status quo that we see so much of really consuming so many people's highlight reels on social media and in their content, and that's just not the full story of their life.
For sure. I had an interesting experience last week, and those of you who follow me on social media know I really try hard to show up in all the ways that I am, but I had been having a couple of really hard days, and my sort of MO when I'm feeling that way is to hide. It's like, I don't want anybody to see me struggle. And I'm recognizing, just like you say, that when I share my struggle, it honors other people's struggle. And that's how we create connection. Like, we don't create connection by being like everyone else.
Exactly.
Right? And so, I'm curious, do you have, like, when you first started on this journey, and I do believe that it is that, I'm 46 and I'm still embodying this idea of what you're talking about, of feeling like I can own all of the parts of me. So when you first started on this, like, can you share a story with us about a thing about you that you were nervous about letting other people see?
Oh, I have so many.
Will this just end up being a podcast about all the embarrassing things about us? Because that would be fun.
I'll think of two that really stand out to me.
Okay.
One is personal, so and pretty light, is nutrition. And so I think that, like, when I think of listening to my inner voice, I always knew that I never enjoyed meat. My entire childhood, I was that kid that you had to be like, eat your meat, you know, not eat your vegetables. The vegetables would have been gone before you thought to tell me that. And yet, you know, in my upbringing, you had to eat meat. There was no example out there of what it looked like to live without meat consumption. And so I continued this lifestyle. And I remember going into college and kind of being in and out of experimenting with this vegetarian diet and not really knowing what I was doing. And a lot of that consisted of like processed vegetarian foods, which was just not healthy.
Bread and cheese.
Basically, I was definitely on the pizza meal plan in college. And I spent most of my college days feeling sick. And then feeling sick led me to being in the doctor's office a lot. And that led to being prescribed the wrong medication, Aleve, which actually can cause stomach ulcers. It's not for stomach issues. And then before I knew it, I had like full IBS and a lot of issues related to that because I didn't listen to my truth and my voice that I had known my whole life. I didn't want to eat meat. If I felt sick for a long time, I'd be told by people, well, it's because you're not eating meat. You need to start eating meat again. And then I just felt more sick and more sick and more sick. And what I really needed to do was get out of the programming that I think, with me being in my 30s, that we had received back then in these days of the standard American diet. The SAD is pizza and ice cream. And I mean, what do you see college kids with? It's really unhealthy junk. And I knew that that's not what Mother Nature created. And so I just kind of ignored that because it was what I thought I was supposed to eat, is what the commercials show you. And so I really learned a lot about listening to what my body is telling me from my journey with nutrition. And you know this about me, but your audience doesn't, is that I completely went from that place to full-blown like award-winning bodybuilder in my adulthood. So it's definitely been a journey of listening to my body when it comes to nutrition and ignoring the messages that come in from the commercials. If you need a commercial for food, it's probably not healthy.
Right. Well, I think too, especially in that example that you give, I wonder, was it a challenge for you to explain to your family what your decision was? Because I don't know about in your family, but in my family, like food is part of sort of our heritage. It's part of who we are. You know, we have stories that revolve around food, and this, you know, sweet potato casserole at Thanksgiving and, you know, the special things that are sort of part of your family story. So was that hard for you?
Absolutely. I was always the oddball out at family dinners and was told I was being antisocial sometimes because I chose not to bring my own food or to not eat. It was definitely like a journey, but I will say, you know, I learned from that to stick with your gut and stick with listening to yourself, because I look at it now and I watched my family go from soul food. I'm African American, so, you know, we grew up with sweet potato pie. We grew up with mashed potatoes and mac and cheese and fried chicken. And I'm like the only, you know, one that didn't eat any of that and really just wanted like the roasted veggies. And I noticed that in me choosing to do what felt good for my body and going through my own journey with my health and nutrition, it inspired my family to actually clean up their own diet and start working out and really reduce their meat consumption. And now I look at my dad, who grew up on steak and things like that, and he doesn't even eat red meat anymore.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, and I think that, you know, what I really hear you saying is that when you start taking action that is aligned with your soul, you feel better. Like that is who you are. And so even though you might have these generational stories about your family and what your family does, and it may feel as though you don't belong because you're not fitting in with those stories, it's more about belonging to yourself.
Absolutely. And there's also a power in that, which is when you stand your ground and you continue to do what's true for yourself, I think you begin to radiate at like just a different energy. And it can really begin to open up conversation with others who are living a different lifestyle or living a different truth, to even consider that there's other options out there. Because me being the only vegetarian in my family, this is just something that they never even considered being an option. And I just don't think that there was a lot of thought being given to what types of food that they culturally ate. Because, in African American culture, a lot of the traditional meals are brought down from a history of slavery. And that history of slavery includes a lack of access to certain foods and really being given the leftover scraps. And it's like, hey, we're in 2020 right now as we're recording this. We don't need to continue to eat that way.
That's so fascinating, because before you said that, I had never thought about the historical context of the traditional foods. And that's super interesting, just to sort of think about that perspective of that, and to think about how you can be free from that.
Absolutely. I sit back and I think about, pig feet and hog mogs and chitlins and all those things. And it's like, yes, culturally, that is something that my demographic has been exposed to. And also, those were the leftovers. That was what others didn't want.
Yeah. Well, so you said that there was another example.
Yes. And so when I think about something that many people can relate to, I think about my career. And so when I stepped into really getting into modeling and being in that industry, there was a lot of stale marketing advice out there. And eventually I decided to intuitively make a career shift to being a photographer, out of wanting to provide a safe space for others where they didn't have to worry about the sexual harassment and sexual abuse that ran rampant in that industry from male photographers with teenage models. And yet I had no blueprint. I had no mentors, and my degree program was very focused on the artistry of photography and graphic design, but not on the business piece. And so a lot of the advice and feedback that I was getting was coming from what I think a lot of people who are coming from, a low income status and maybe not a lot of time or money to invest into additional education do, is you hop on YouTube, right? Or you Google things. And the advice was so consistent back then, and I'm sure some of your listeners who own a business can relate to it, but it very much came from, whether you're building a personal brand or a business brand, to focus on quantity, to focus on the formula. Oh, you're in this industry, you need to have branding that uses these colors and this type of logo, and you need to show up on this social media website and market yourself in that way. And, that's easy, right? Because you have the blueprint in front of you and all you have to do is follow it. It focused on quantity in a sense that everything was focused so much on getting more followers, more eyes on what you're doing, more subscribers to your podcast, more numbers on your email list. And everything for me intuitively felt repelled from that. And I'll admit, I tried some of those tactics and they just did not feel good for me. It just didn't feel aligned with who I was or how I wanted to do things. And so the more that I went inward and really asked myself, what was my inner voice telling me? It was telling me that I valued diversity. I valued individuality. I valued quality connections, quality relationships. And this marketing advice that was so focused on quantity and fitting in and stereotyping people based on what their industry was went completely against that. Big one to realize there.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I feel like it's almost like what you're saying about what you learned in business is also reflecting back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, where we all sort of are taught to fit in this certain way. Do your hair this way and wear your makeup this way and wear these clothes and be this size. Or if you're not that size, be on a diet and say these things and go to these places and listen to this music. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? Of how to fit in. And those are also formulas.
Absolutely.
And so when we begin to step away from the formula and understand that we are, each and every one of us, will never fit into a formula. There's no way that we can fit into a formula, whether it be in our personal lives or in our business lives. That is not going to feel good. It's not going to work for you. So how do you go about the process of uncovering these things, these special little interesting things about you that maybe are embarrassing or silly or just you think that they don't really matter? How do you go about discovering them and deciding which things to share?
That's a great question. I would say with clients, I definitely take them through a framework that we have. And I say framework in a sense that we know that certain ways of approaching something works, but it's not a formula. Mm-hmm. So we know that part of the process of flaunting your fire is that you do need to go inward and you need to clarify and you really need to get clear on who you are. And we hold space to share that with us. There's exercises to help you do that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. I've also had my own that I've tried and have found like my sweet spot and what has worked well for me because everyone is different. Mm-hmm. And then also you need to audit what's happening because all the clarity in the world of, who you really are is not going to be perceived on the outside if we don't audit how others perceive us too and see what's aligned and what's misaligned. And so one of the first places that I like to start is getting clear in your values. It's something that sounds like, oh, of course, right? But it's something that most of us don't take time to really sit down and give focused attention to laying out on paper or typing it out on the computer if you're a typer, exactly what your values are, narrowing it down to the 5 max most important ones. And then in addition to that, what do these values mean? What do they look like in action, not just in concept?
I love that. And, I feel like we're talking about this right now in the context of business, but this is also, I know, something that I've done on a personal level too, because when you get clear on your values, then you make different kinds of decisions.
Absolutely. It's funny, but my business partner, Erica Corday from Pause and Play, as a coach, she always says at some point, business and life can get a little blurred. And it's true because the exact thing that we do in that process is we also look at personal life because you're still a whole human in your business. So even if you're not a business owner, it's important to do this because we don't realize that if we value shopping and spending our money locally, and we haven't taken the time to lay out what shop local, for example, means to us, then it doesn't become so obvious that one of the things that you will do as a human or as a business when you decide that shop local is a value is to purchase from your local coffee shop instead of Starbucks. You don't realize that one of the things your business won't do is make its first choice be a large corporation like McDonald's or Starbucks. And so when we don't take the time to really look at these kinds of things, even if they're personal buying decisions or personal yeses and nos of what we'll say yes or no to, it can kind of spill over into our daily choices that we aren't being aligned with those values. And then that can create the feeling of not being truly within integrity of ourselves. And so how are we going to be able to have a public image or reputation that reflects who we are if we're not beginning with what we're doing on our own that people don't necessarily get to see? And so there's a lot of ways to go about that. I'm really curious to hear some of, how you've worked with your clients on that too. So I know for me, my practices that have gotten me there is laying out those values, but then on a daily basis doing things like exercise to help me get back into my body and out of my head, and sound baths as well as a way of meditating, has also been like a really great support for listening to my own voice.
Yeah. Well, I love journaling. That's huge for me, and all of my listeners know that that's one of my favorite. But I also think that movement is a really, really valuable way to understand what our inner voice is saying. Because when we are connected with our bodies, that's just another vehicle that our inner voice can use to speak with us. It's like what you were saying about your college experience where you're, eating these things that aren't serving you, and your body expressed that to you. And it took a while for you to listen to it, but eventually once you did, you figured out the answer. Like a doctor didn't need to give you that answer. And I'm not saying that doctors are bad for all that are listening. They're very valuable, but I think oftentimes we have the answers that we seek already inside of us.
Yes.
And when we take the time to listen in many different ways, then we have access to those like in an easier way. I think a lot of times when we talk about listening to our inner voice, people feel like it's a struggle. And it can be if you're not practicing, if you don't have daily habits for creating that connection with your inner voice. And that is, it's really about the repeatability of connecting with your inner voice that makes it easier and easier. And so, when going back to this concept of values, like for me, that is one of my values. I am connected to my inner voice on a daily basis. And so when I step away from that, I'm not 100% aligned all of the time. If only I could be that way, but I'm not. And there are days that, I get kicked in the butt by life and I forget to check in, or, it's just not top of mind. I feel it and I notice it. And it's so important for me to get back to that. When you work with people on sort of digging into this value system, what are some of the things, the practices or, the processes that you use to help them identify those values?
That's a great question. So I think it's important to be clear that I don't identify as being a coach. What our brand does is we really help people to step into their brand values, and then we kind of help them guide from those values what decisions they're making within their brand visibility. So what podcasts they say yes to, what podcasts they say no to, speaking opportunities, brand partnership deals, redesigning of their websites, logos. All of those decisions get made from their values and who they want to attract to those values. And so with them, a lot of what we're doing is going through a series of questions and prompts that they're able to answer for themselves. We also highly recommend, with the way that we do rebrands, pairing the time that they're spending with us on the visual and the marketing pieces with a coach like yourself, because we do dive deep And we also know that we're not necessarily the proper team to help with the coaching industry pieces of it. But within that, we look at, what do they stand for? What do you stand against? For some people who aren't quite at the place where they have enough clarity to answer that, I found that a really helpful question is like, what has you pissed off and fired up and wanting to change things?
Yes.
That's a great place to think, because this year has just really brought up a lot of feelings for people, and people can feel really angry or really sad or really excited. But typically, if we're looking at what's going around in the world around us or in our industries, even if we're an employee, we still have an industry. That's a great place to begin to see what your values are.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Now, I want to go back to something that you mentioned, because I think it seems to me like in the order of things, the values piece comes first. So we get clear on the values, and then we start to share from that place. So what we share about ourselves and about who we are and about what we're doing in the way is a reflection of the values, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so then you said, then we have to audit. And I find this very interesting. Can you tell me more about what you mean by auditing how others perceive us?
Absolutely. So I do want to clarify that sharing, depending on where you're at with those values and how aligned you feel, may not be sharing with the world. That might be just sharing with your partner.
Thank you for saying that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like how to define clearly those boundaries of what you share and what you don't share?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is something that I love partnering with the coach to help a client decide if they're needing that support. But I don't think that everything is for everyone. And then also, it's not just what you're sharing, but how much do you share about that? So I find that a good example is, for me, I've just started to begin to even touch the surface of sharing. That part of the reason that I started my entire business over 10 years ago to create this safe space is because I'm a survivor of sexual violence myself. And so it was something that really was close to my heart, and I could resonate with people who had been through that. But what I don't share is all the details of who and how old and how it happened and things like that. Maybe someday, I'm not sure, but one of the things that I do think about for myself is like, okay, am I speaking from a fresh wound that's bleeding or am I speaking from a scar? And I think that, we have other people in our circle that have used that phrase before too, but it's true. And so part of the reason that I have more recently begun to be able to share is because I have received therapy, EFT as well as EMDR, or for those that are not familiar with that, emotional freedom technique, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which are two clinically proven types of therapy that are really supportive for people with PTSD and CPTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. To share from a place where I had not gone through that and began my healing process for things that are, very hard to experience and can have some lasting effect, would not have been safe or felt safe or healthy for me to do. And then also, I find that it's important to ask yourself, why are you sharing? Is the way that you're sharing an energy that is going to re-traumatize people potentially? Is the way that you're sharing becoming the look at me show? Woe is me, I'm the victim here. Those are not places to share from. And really asking yourself the truth of, are you sharing to be helpful? Are you sharing to connect? Are you sharing to show people that maybe somebody could go through what you've been through? or have a value that you have, such as being anti-racist, and see that you can speak out about that and still be successful and not be shunned by society or all the other fears that we tell ourselves will happen, that's a really different place to share from.
Yeah, I really appreciate you expanding on that, because I think in today's sort of social media world, and I see this with mostly younger people, but often even older people, I'm seeing this sort of just this sharing in such a way that it doesn't feel good. Like, I know for myself, if I'm watching someone cross that boundary, I feel it. And you know, I think that it's again, we have to be connected to our bodies. We have to be connected to our inner voice to let it guide us in that way, because it's almost like, for me, it's a physical feeling of like I want to like collapse inward on myself. You know, it's protective, really. And when I hear someone else doing that, I still feel that same feeling in my body. So it's really good to sort of be aware of what we're being told by our inner voice in that regard. So thank you. So
You're so welcome.
About auditing, I think this is a really interesting, because you're not saying, you know, that the point is to care about what other people think of you, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like, there's a distinction here, like, but auditing is a different, it's different. Can you talk about that?
So I'm so glad that you said that, because one of the challenges of auditing is, depending on where we're at energetically, emotionally, all those things, is it can start that fear spiral of, what do other people think about me, right?
Right.
And so I highly recommend that the audit process should always be done by an external party, not by yourself. I don't think that that's the most emotionally healthy thing to do for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most beautiful ways to do that is to have a third party come in and look at, if you're on social media, what are you talking about? You know, how many times do I see you talking about that list of values that you said were the most important 5 things to you in your life? You know, what actions do I see you taking? What events are you showing up at? If you're saying that you care about diversity, which is one of my values, you know, are you saying yes to events that have not one single bit of diversity, not one man, one person of color speaking? It's all white women.
Yeah.
I see it all the time. And this is not to put any shame on anyone for these choices, because I will raise my hand and say that I have to audit too. You know, it's very easy to end up on autopilot with these things. So I have my team audit me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's necessary, because we don't always see everything clearly when it's us from the outside.
Oh, no. We definitely don't.
No. And that external filter also provides you a barrier, so you're not hearing that feedback directly, or who it came from, because that's not always the healthiest thing.
Yeah.
And then as we get that information back, the next thing I always say is to be easy on yourself and to give yourself grace, because sometimes we find things that we don't like, and so also sometimes we find amazing things, like, yeah, I didn't think I was talking about this, but actually they said I talk about it all the time and I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
But it's data, and view it as data, view it as information to show you how you may want to be visible in the future to be more aligned. Whether that's changing what you talk about, whether that's shifting who you associate with, or who people from the outside looking in would associate you with because they see you sharing their content or showing up at their events. We all have these things, whether it's shifting your purchasing decisions. Are you ordering from Amazon all the time? You know, but you say that you want to support small business. It gives you the data to begin to create the roadmap to the future you.
I love that. It gives you the data to begin to create the roadmap to the future you. That's beautiful, India. I adore this conversation, and I just want to remind everyone that's listening, this is business and life. It's all of it. It's all of it. And all of these things that we're talking about, values and sharing those things about you that you think are dorky or silly or vulnerable, those are the things that make you you. India, I love you. And I thank you for indulging me and coming back on to have another beautiful conversation with me that we can share. And of course, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests in your life right now. What is your inner voice asking of you?
Oh, such a great question. I would say right now it is telling me to continue disrupting expectations and to continue amplifying my own influence. It's something that we help our clients do, but I think it's so important because it's so much easier to fit in than it is to stand out. It's so much easier to hide. But fitting in never created a legacy. When we think about the most influential and change-making people in this world, they didn't fit in. They stood up and they said something that other people were afraid to say.
Yes, I just got goosebumps like on my head. Fitting in never created a legacy. I think that's the best spot to stop right there. How can people find you and connect with you, India?
Sure. If you're here, you're probably a podcast listener, so you can find me over at Flaunt Your Fire. We have the Flaunt Your Fire podcast where we talk about visibility and how we show up in the world and aligning ourselves with our values and our public image. And we also have an Instagram account. Instagram over there, we're at Flaunt Your Fire.
Excellent. And I will be sure to put links to all of those things in the show notes. And everyone will recognize Erica Corday, who's been on in her voice a couple of times too. She's India's partner at Flaunt Your Fire and co-host at the Flaunt Your Fire podcast. And so thank you, India, for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I appreciate everything about you and especially your gentle spirit. Thank you for letting that shine through today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I love this. Fitting in never created a legacy. Boom. That is such a huge takeaway. And I hope that this interview has reminded you of what makes you special. Because you are amazing. I also want to remind you that it's okay if you need help every now and then. It's okay if you struggle to know which direction you need to go in next, or if you struggle even with the simple idea of understanding what it is that you want most. That is where the practice of listening to your inner voice comes in. And this is not a practice that we are taught growing up. This is not something that comes easily and effortlessly. And it's nice to have some hand holding. And that's what I do. I will hold your hand with you and teach you how to listen to your inner voice and teach you how to listen to what your soul is asking for. And the beauty of that is you can get really clear on what you want so you can stop wasting time and energy on the things that don't matter. Have you ever done that? Yeah, me too. And there's no need to do that when you listen to your inner voice. So if you're feeling a pull, if you feel like you could use a little bit of hand holding, a little bit of extra support in creating the practice of listening to your inner voice, I encourage you to sign up for a deep dive session. This is a 60 to 90 minute session where you really take the time to listen. and I am your guide in that. So I would love to support you in listening and finding those things that really matter to you, and just really honing in on the most important things and stop wasting time and energy on the rest. So if this is calling to you, you can sign up for your deep dive session at kellycovert.com. And I look forward to talking with you. As always, a reminder for you today. You are so amazing. You are so wonderful. You have so many things to offer. You are so special and so unique and so talented. Please, please, please own it. Know that what makes you unique is needed and wanted and desired in this world. You are worthy.